Welcome to the 24th Annual Franklin County Quilters Guild Quilt Show. We have been doing this, obviously, since 2000. Well, actually before 2000, because we took a few years off during COVID. But this is the 24th Quilt Show in 2024. So we have 60 members at this point, but it didn't start out like that. In the beginning, in 1991, there were 8 women in Franklin County who all made quilts and decided to get together, join forces, learn from one another, and they met in each other's homes. And then they put an ad in the local, or just a notice in the local paper, and the numbers began to grow. So we are now at 60 members, as I said, and we have gone as high as 75 to 80 members at one point. But we work hard, we do a lot among ourselves. We take workshops and learn new skills, and we donate many, many quilts to the community. So let's start talking about those quilts. If you look here, these are what we call our comfort quilts. These are made by our members, and they are gathered together and donated to different organizations in the Franklin, Grand Isle County areas. Some of the places we donate are to Franklin County Home Health, Spectrum Youth Services, the Linus Project, which is quilts for children who have different illnesses, families who have reliance due to fire or flood or other calamities, cancer patients in the hospitals, and care home residents. So, and oftentimes as individuals, we donate quilts to friends who are ill or to someone in our community who is going through a hard time. So these quilts were all made by our members. You can see they vary in style and color, and it's whatever we want to make. Sometimes we use our own fabrics. Sometimes we use fabrics that have been donated to or purchased by the Guild. And over here at our check-in table, we're going to encourage people to take some ballots, and as they walk through our quilt show, to vote for the quilts that it just strikes them, and it's their favorite quilt. So there are different categories, as you'll see when we look at the quilts. Bed quilts, which fit anything from a twin to a king. Lap quilts, which are anything smaller than that you would just have on the back of your sofa to curl up with when you're watching television. Wall hangings, which we use as decorative items. Miniature and art quilts, which are pretty interesting because of the tiny piecing or the technique that's used. And then this year, the challenge quilts, which are something blue. So those quilts will all have something blue about them. On the wall here, you'll see that for this quilt show, which takes a lot of effort and some money to put on, we have sponsors for our quilt show. Members of different communities, people who are interested in quilting or support nonprofit organizations, nonprofit organizations like ours. Each of those sponsors will come to the quilt show today or tomorrow and give a ribbon to the quilt that he or she thinks represents something to them, something that strikes them. They like the colors, they like the style, and so we look forward to seeing whether we are awarded a ribbon at the quilt show. And over here, we talk to people about what we do as they come through the doors, and we encourage them to make a donation so that we can continue to purchase fabrics to make these comfort quilts. This is one of our charity quilts this year. 2 members of our quilting membership made this beautiful quilt, and it's going to go to Rock Steady Boxing, which is an organization here in St. Albans that supports and trains people who have Parkinson's disease. And they are going to use it to sell raffle tickets to earn money for their organization. This year we're awarding 3 charity quilts to nonprofit organizations, and this one was made by 2 women who are related and work together often, and it is just a stunning, beautiful quilt that I would like to win, actually. So let's go look at quilts. This is our second charity quilt. This is going to be donated to the Meeting House on the Green in East Fairfield, Vermont. and it was made by two of our members also. We like to work together. We encourage teamwork. We learn new skills and support one another. If we have to tear something out and put it back together, we have that support person sitting next to us. And this is our third charity quilt. This is going to go to the Enosburg food shelf. Nonprofit organizations can apply to every year to our Quilt Guild to get one of these beautiful quilts in order to have a raffle and raise money for their own organization. And this again was made by two members of our guild. So if you step back from this quilt, you can see the beautiful design that's displayed by all of the stripes in the middle of the quilts. This is called a string quilt, and here is the block. So each block has this fabric, a blue fabric in the center, and then by laying them out a certain way, you can get a different look for every string quilt that you make. So you will see different designs and patterns and colors in the quilts that we're going to go look at now. So this is our 2024 raffle quilt. We've been selling tickets for this quilt since the summer. This was designed by one of our members. She and another woman put the quilt together with fabric that was donated to our guild, and it is just a stunning quilt. If you look at all the details, there are pinwheels throughout with the triangle blocks, and the colors work beautifully together. So if you come to the quilt show, don't forget to stop and buy a raffle ticket. So this is one of our vendors. We call them vendors. In Vermont and in every state, we have a Quilt of Valor Foundation, and they donate quilts to veterans, people who have served our country. And tomorrow afternoon at 2, one of our quilts will be presented to a very deserving veteran here in St. Albans. So these people come from southern Vermont and spend the weekend with us and talk about Quilts of Valor. And they take donations as well because they need money to buy fabrics to make the quilts that they donate. And some of our members make quilts and give to them so that they have quilts on hand. So we'll go this way. These quilts are all the same pattern, but if you look at them, they're very different in how they finished. So this was a Block of the Month challenge that many of our members participated in. So each month you made a different block. Maybe it was this one, or maybe it was your center star, and you just continue to make the blocks throughout the year. And when you finish, you got this beautiful quilt. And so each member chooses her own fabric, his or her own fabric. We do have a male member. And you can see how very different each of these quilts look, even though it's the same pattern. So now we're going to start looking at the quilts that our members have made and have put on display. The first section is bed quilts, and we have 36 bed quilts, and they are just stunning. So come with me. So this first quilt was made by one of our members' sisters, and they worked together. So her sister made the front of this quilt, which is just a stunning star quilt. And I'm going to show you the back because our member made the back of this quilt. So you really have two quilts in one if this is given to you. So the next quilt is made by one of our members. This was a mystery quilt, and mystery quilts are interesting because you choose your fabrics, and then each month or each week you get a clue, and it tells you how to put certain fabrics together. So if you look at this quilt, there are many blocks that are the same, so those were probably one clue. And you just keep building the clues. This is another block here. And at the end, you are given instructions on how to put each of those blocks into a larger block to make this pattern that continues. And this mystery quilt was designed by a woman who likes to use scraps of fabric, really small pieces. So it's a stunning quilt using things that you might have on hand in your house. This quilt was made by one of our members who actually served in the military, and she wanted to represent her roots and what mattered to her, something that was important. And she put together, this is called a sampler quilt, because each block is different but uses some of the same fabrics so that when you finish, you have a quilt that is cohesive. And the back of her quilt, if you look, is beautifully quilted with stars and stripes to represent what the theme of this quilt. One of our members bought a kit. That's another way that many of our members make quilts. They buy the kit, which includes the pattern and all of the fabrics that you need to finish the quilt. And it has many different skills involved. This is part of a panel, which is a printed piece of fabric that has these designs on it. And then she made these blocks to represent wheels of a bicycle. And it turned out to look like all these different wheels and gears that you might see on a bicycle. And she calls it pedal pushers. The same person who made that quilt made this quilt, which involves many different techniques, not just sewing small pieces together as this one did. This one is called Garden Party, and it's also a kit. So when she purchased this kit, she got the pattern and all of these fabrics. But this involves a technique called applique. So all of these pieces are imposed on this background fabric and then stitched around them, and then she quilted this herself using a special kind of machine for quilting. So, I mean, if you look at this, this involves much work. If you look at these flowers, they're really small hearts that are imposed on this fabric. So, lots of work. This quilt is called Flower Baskets, and this is a very old pattern that's quite traditional. And she did a really nice job of using floral prints throughout her quilt. And this is called sashing, which separates the blocks. And then the blocks are laid out in a certain way so that when you look at it, you see this myriad display of flower baskets. And this quilt is a very basic pattern. This is called a 4-patch because, as you can see, there are 4 blocks sewn together in a certain pattern, and then he sashed it. But it's a stunning quilt that has this heart added on, and he calls it squares. And he used up some of his different fabrics. These are all they don't necessarily work together, but when you use some kind of fabric that's cohesive, then it makes for a quilt that looks pretty darn nice and mimics a very traditional old pattern. So now we're going to go to the wall and look at our challenge quilts. These are all the challenge quilts, and the challenge was something blue, as I said earlier. So every piece must have something blue in it. So this one is a table runner that is filled with all kinds of blues and daisies. This one is for the eclipse. It's called Moon Shadow in Vermont. And she has the stages of the eclipse, and she quilted this herself. This one is a technique called thread painting. So she took little pieces of fabric and imposed them on a background, and then she thread paints over them. And if you look very closely, you can see all the different threads that give this the movement that it seems to have. When she was taking this class and learning this technique, many of her classmates said, "What's your dog's name? What's your dog's name?" And she got sick of hearing it, and she said, "It's not my dog." So that is her dog's name. This one is called Bluebird in Flight, and what better way to honor the color blue than to make a bluebird. And this woman loves birds, and she does birds quite a bit in her quilts. This one is called Singing the Blues, and she has beautiful blue fabric, and she did, these are called half square triangles, and this is a pinwheel in the middle, and the way that she used this black fabric, which has musical notes in it, she created this beautiful pattern on blue. This is called Bird of Paradise, which mimics that flower that we see in the Caribbean. And if you look closely, this is called paper piecing, and it has tiny, tiny little pieces in here. This would drive me crazy, but look at the beautiful effect that she achieved with her patience and skill. This one is called Sew, Quilt, Love, and it's honoring blue fabrics throughout. This woman really likes blue, so this was a fun challenge for her. This is called Bird Friends. This woman feeds the birds, and she said she wanted to honor the birds that come to her bird feeder, particularly the blue jays. And this is a blue challenge, and this is an interlocking pattern that you see in many quilts with this spinning wheel in the middle. Beautiful colors of blue throughout. This one is called pinwheels, and you can see them in the pattern, and the way these fabrics work together creates a beautiful, beautiful, stunning blue piece. This one is called Starbright Starlight. And this person made this beautiful center, also paper pieced, where you use some kind of a foundation paper and sew and turn to get these perfect points and to get this stunning spinning star. And she quilted it herself with these stars all around so that she carried the theme throughout. This one is, I called it, this is one that I made. Many of us took a class in a Zoom meeting and learned how to do paper piecing in a different way. And in order to get these sharp points, you have to do the similar things that other people have done here. And it was a challenge for me and for many of us, but nevertheless, we finished them, and I just thought it was beautiful. The man who taught this class lives in Manchester, New Hampshire, and he calls this his New Hampshire Beauty. But the original pattern was called New York Beauty, which always includes these sharp points in a circle to mimic the crown on the Statue of Liberty. So, and these are our miniatures. We only have 6 this year, but each one involves a different technique. This one, if you look closely, is a confetti technique, where you start with maybe a photo or an idea, and you literally have little tiny pieces of fabric that you sprinkle on a background to create this beautiful photograph, really. And then there are different steps that you layer on top and then do the thread painting to stabilize everything. And I haven't tried this technique, but I've watched people do it, and it requires a lot of patience and much skill. This is a pattern, obviously the state of Vermont, and the woman who made this pattern lives in Chittenden County and is a very active member of their guild, and she's made patterns for, I think, all the states now, all 50 states. So one of our members made this wall hanging of the state of Vermont. This one, again, paper pieced, very tiny points, and this is a log cabin block in here. A half log cabin, which is a traditional pattern, but how she gets these small pieces to work beautifully, I don't know. Skill and patience again. This one is called Shoreline, and this woman tries many different techniques, and this one is, let me see, I just want to look at it. It's a photo that has been blended on fabric and printed, and then she has these lift-up pieces to show the whole photo underneath, which is looking up into a tree. It is just stunning, many, many layers of work in this piece. This one is called Scene on the Acadian Trail. One of our members goes to Newfoundland, I think it is, at Cape Breton Highlands National Park. And it's a 2-mile hike up a hill to get to this top and sit in the red chair. And it's one of her favorite places in the world, and she wanted to honor that with doing this piece. And this is called Matisse on My Mind, and it's many skills involved here. Applique, quilting. She does her own quilting and is just masterful at it. If you can see all these different lines, that's the quilting that she's done. I don't know much to say about that, except it really is a stunning piece. We're going to look at more bed quilts. This is a quilt that, if you look here at the block, there's a log cabin right here. And so each of these blocks has 4 log cabin blocks in it. I just want to look at the card for a minute. This is the first quilt that this woman ever made. So it's been used and loved for many years, and you can see that they really do hold up. This was the quilt that inspired her to make more quilts. The log cabin block is a a block that's one of the original blocks that's been around in quilting forever, and is a block that many people start with when they're learning to quilt. This is a quilt made by our male member, and he calls it bamboo, and he wanted to, mimic a bamboo grove, and he thinks maybe it looks more like Frogger. But beautiful use of fabrics and quilting, and I see a thread that I'll take off. This quilt is, if you step back and look at it, it's a huge heart made out of many sampler blocks. And so if you look closely, this is called a churn dash. That's a very traditional old pattern. This is part of a Dresden plate, another traditional block. Pinwheels throughout. And this block is called the O block, as you can see. And sometimes people mix them up with a block that looks like an X. We have many square and a square blocks here. These are called flying geese. This is a half square triangle block. But she does a fine job of mixing colors and patterns. And she, if you look, you can see all of the skill that's involved in making this quilt. This is called Deer in the Woods. It's a beautiful quilt that's made from a panel, which is the center, and then she used these fabrics around it to really honor that panel and use the same colors. Fall in Vermont with the birch trees and the deer. This quilt is called, there's a quilt designer called Gudrun. I can't say her last name. She's from one of the Slavic countries, the Nordic countries, sorry. But she lives in the United States, and she designs quilts and she designs fabric. And this is one of her patterns. And the use of these fabrics really shows it off beautifully. And this woman has a boat that she and her husband spend a lot of time on, and she's going to use this on the bed in their boat. This quilt has a really beautiful story. It's called Nine Sisters, and it's a design. And if you look around the center, there's one in the center, and then there are 9 stars around the center to represent, this woman actually has 9 sisters, and each star in the corner represents her 4 brothers. So she made this quilt to honor her family. And her use of fabrics and the quilting design really make it beautiful. And this is a beautiful quilt that was purchased last year by one of our members, but it was made by another one of our members to use as a raffle quilt to raise money for Northwest Medical Center's program where they give quilts to many of the people who are in their hospital. And so it's called a medallion, and if you look at it, even though these are different star patterns, they form a beautiful medallion around this centerpiece. And you can actually buy tickets for this, and the information to contact is on the card. So this is one of our patriotic quilts, as you can see. And it is a pattern called Indigo Way, which is another designer outside of our quilt guild, but we buy patterns often or have these speakers teach us about their patterns by Zoom meetings. We do that in the winter, which is wonderful. And this woman is going to be presenting this quilt to a veteran through the Quilts of Valor program on Sunday. I just want to show you the back, because if you look closely, there are eagles. And I'm trying to find them, and I'm having difficulty, but they're there. But beautiful quilting pattern. This is called a hunter star pattern, which is another old traditional pattern, where all of these pieces come together from the block and form these beautiful stars that appear throughout the quilt. And the use of the dark and light fabrics makes it just stunning. One of our members who absolutely loves the color purple saw this pattern. There was a class at a local quilt shop but it didn't work with her schedule, but she bought the pattern and used, her favorite color and made this beautiful bed quilt with all different kinds of stars with the diamond in the border. This is a quilt that has a lot of difficult piecing in it. If you look closely, these are all applique pieces that are attached to these fabrics. And then the center, she has words to live by. And in each block, she has a word that is embroidered. This one says loyalty, and that one says truth, maybe. And this one says hope. So it's a really neat idea of words to live, just a stunning quilt that reminds us, maybe, of things that we could think about each day. A lot of half square triangles around this beautiful applique medallion in the center. This quilt was a kit that our member bought, and she put it together and at a quilting retreat that some of us attended, and where we sew for 7 days in a row. And when she got it all put together, she had mixed up a couple of the blocks on the bottom and had to tear them out and replace them and sew them back together. But what a stunning quilt she has here. And she paid a quilting, someone who does quilting as a business, to quilt this for her. Beautiful quilt. And this one is called Fall Aflutter. This woman did a workshop at the Strong House in Vermont with other quilters, where they had a woman come in and teach one of her own patterns. And this is the pattern that our member chose, and it's a beautiful quilt to honor fall in Vermont. Well, the maple leaves. If you want to look up here, this is called our Members Boutique, where we have an opportunity to sell some of the items that we've made. And they range from quilts to different size tote bags, to wallets, to bowl cozies to heat your food in the microwave, to table runners, to all kinds of items that people who come to our quilt show are encouraged to check out and maybe purchase something to take home. And we have some items up there to honor the eclipse, so that people can, if they're here in town for the eclipse, perhaps they can take home a memento from the Quilters Guild. Okay, we have more bed quilts to look at here. This one is called a Mariner's Compass, and it is a stunning quilt requiring lots of work, lots of paper piecing, and the quilting on it is beautiful as well. So if you look at these points, they all interlock to make this gorgeous pattern, and it's surrounded by all these curved flying geese, square and a square, and more flying geese here on the edges. It is a beautiful quilt. This woman was annoyed because she let her husband choose a pattern for her, and this is what he chose. And so she made it through to the end. So this is Leon's quilt. I'd like you to look at this one, because this woman has more than, I need to see the number, 6,374 pieces of fabric in this quilt. And they are all appliqued and paper pieced. The quilting is stunning. Even the border has all these small pieces of fabric with black in between, like a stained glass effect. And it is a stunning quilt that she worked on for more than 2 years.
I'll bring a green one tomorrow.
Okay. This quilt is called My Magical Garden, and again, a beautiful example of applique. And if you look at these small pieces that interlock, all the way through, the whole thing is appliqued. This border is half square triangles that offset that applique beautifully. This quilt is called My Red and White Quilt. This person designed this herself, and each block, it's a sampler quilt, as we've looked at before, where each block is a little bit different. She does have them repeating, but the effect is just gorgeous. And she wanted you to see the back of her quilt, so you can see all the beautiful quilting. By the way, if you attend a quilt show, don't ever touch the quilts. There are people who will be wearing white gloves who will show you these kinds of things. This quilt is called Nebula, and if you look at it, it just has all different fabrics fading from darker to lighter, and then they just surround this gorgeous star made out of these diamond-shaped blocks that are strips of fabric sewn together in a certain manner, cut, and then pieced to create these diamonds. It is a beautiful quilt. This quilt is called my Vermont wildflower patch. And if you look at it closely, you can see that she has 8 different wildflowers appliqued on the background and surrounded by grass-type fabric that has grass printed on it. And then these that look like a garden path or walking through the woods to look at all these beautiful wildflowers. Beautiful quilt. This one, this woman started this quilt years ago and then put it away because she was still working and she just didn't have the time. But when she pulled it out and finished it, she was very satisfied with the look that it got. Sometimes when you mix colors that are close together on the color wheel with fabrics that are opposite on the color wheel, you get this stunning effect that really shows off your pattern. And here is the block right here, but you put them together and you get this center block where all these pieces come together. This quilt has a beautiful story. The blue, this woman's grandmother made all these blue blocks many years ago. And they were all different sizes, and they were in pretty bad shape. And she trimmed them all. She took the quilt apart, trimmed all the blocks to be the same size. They're hand embroidered. And then she added in the blocks and this, we call this reproduction fabric. It's fabric that looks like it's very old, but it really isn't. And this woman's favorite color is red, so she added the reds in with these beautiful blue blocks that her grandmother made and made this stunning quilt, which is, the quilting on it is amazing as well. Beautiful work. This quilt, one of our blocks of the month last year in our quilt guild was this star right here. And this woman was the person who led us in these blocks of the month, so she would make samples to bring to the meetings to show us what they looked like. And so she had 6 of them already done. And so what she did was finished making more blocks and ended up with this beautiful quilt. And again, the quilting is really gorgeous. This quilt is called Find the Birdie. This is made by one of our members who is a prolific quilter. She makes many, many quilts. And she said if you look very closely at these fabrics, you might be able to find some birds. And if you look right here, here's one, and there's one up there. There throughout, there's another one here in the middle of this star. So this quilt has what we call chaining going on. So you have piecing with blocks, different sizes, and it creates this beautiful chain throughout your quilt to emphasize these stars that are in the center of the gold. Nice quilt. This is one of her Christmas quilts. This quilt is another design by a woman, the woman from the Nordic country, who did a workshop for our quilt guild. And this line of fabrics by a fabric designer who originally designed yarn and now makes fabric patterns, mixed with the white, makes for this gorgeous quilt that really shows off the pattern. We're still working on bed quilts. This is called Batik Beauty. So batiks are a fabric that are cotton, and the design is painted on them. So if you look very closely, you can see all the fine colors in each of these fabrics, and they're one of my favorites. And it just is a beautiful sampler quilt using batiks of all different colors that work together beautifully. The reds and greens always work nicely together. And she threw in these soft golds and it makes for a beautiful quilt. So if you step back, you can see the stars throughout and the small pieces that surround some of her blocks. It's a stunner. She makes quilts and gives them away, but she did keep this one, so she has it in her home. This is another batik quilt. It's called Scrappy Batik, and you can see it's a whole different color wave, but these batiks, again, they're hand painted. So it gives the fabric a lot of depth, which to me adds to your design. And these are just scraps sewn together in the center, but surrounded by these beautiful triangular stars. Nice quilt. The same person who made that one made this one, and she used brighter fabrics, and she calls it Joyful Stars. And even though she has a lot of black, because the colors that she chose are so bright and cheerful, it does make for a joyful quilt. Sometimes black used with all these different colors sets them off nicely so that you really see the pattern and see the depth in your fabrics. Same quilter. This is her tribute to Halloween, and it's called Spooky Bats because many of the fabrics have bats in them looking at you. And it's just a fun way to display Halloween fabrics. All different kinds of things, crows and pumpkins and spiders and webs. Bats everywhere. Oh, and skeletons. It's a fun quilt. Any child would love that. And my sister had a Halloween birthday, and her house was decorated at Halloween, more like most people do for Christmas. So she would have loved that quilt. Same quilter. This one's called Dragonfly Dance because most of the fabrics have dragonflies in them. And she mixed it with some of these beautiful greens to create a lovely quilt with a kind of a wonky diamond in a diamond pattern that creates a square. And if you notice the edge of this quilt, it's scalloped, which is something I haven't tried yet, but this woman did it early on in her quilting journey and put scalloped edges on many of her quilts. So that's the end of our bed quilts. As I said, there were 36 of them. So now we're going to look at lap quilts, which are smaller in size, oftentimes used as quilts for children or on the back of a couch or just on a chair, and use it to curl up and watch TV or read a book. So this one's called Dragon Fury because some of the fabrics have this dragon in it. This one does too. And she mixed it nicely with some of these blues and this patterned fabric to create this stained glass look of dragons here and there. This one really shows off the dragon nicely. Pretty nice use of shades of blue throughout and turquoise. I could use that as my camouflage today. This one is called Pastel Shimmer. I don't know if you can see it, but many of the fabrics have like metallic shimmer in them. So any little girl would love this quilt because it has sparkle. Most of those fabrics do have sparkle. It's a very simple design, a 4-patch with unicorns and flowers and things that a little girl would like. And lots of turquoise. Turquoise and shimmer go well together. This one's called Turtle Flow, and it's also made by the woman who made the dragon quilt and the dragonfly quilt. And this one has turtles in it, and she has used a different pattern to really set off those turtles swimming through in the water. And lots of water-type fabrics. This is called Stars Over Bethlehem. It was a Christmas mystery quilt, so she would get instructions each month to make one part of a block, and then eventually the clues would be to sew these two pieces together. And she ended up with these stars that are very different in makeup, but with these points, the same. Beautiful choice of colors, really unique using the gray background. This is a quilt one of my friends made. She has a grandson who likes bright colors, and she said, "Is green still your favorite color?" He said, "I don't care what color it is as long as it's bright." So he'll be getting this quilt that she made. And using this is called ombre fabric, where it fades from one color into another. Oftentimes ombre fabrics are made with just one color, so you go from dark to light, but this one had the rainbow effect, which worked perfectly with these blocks. This is a quilt I made for one of my childhood friends, and this is called the Friendship Star. So I wanted to surround this Ohio star with the Friendship Stars, and I asked her what colors she would like, and she said navy and teal and gray, and she sent me a picture of her carpet in her living room, and so I had all of these fabrics on hand except this one in the middle that I bought, and they just worked nicely together. So she let me borrow it for the quilt show. This one is called Horses and Flowers, and I think you know why. This adorable fabric that has these striped ponies in it goes throughout the quilt, and she just used different colors to frame them. You frame a block with horse or flowers or both, and the horses are just beautiful colors. It's a fun quilt for a little girl. She'll be donating this to our Comfort Quilt program. And this one is called Oh My Fairies. And this was a panel with this fabric that matches it, and she put it together and is going to save it for a special little girl. And what little girl wouldn't want to have this fabric with fairies everywhere? This one is called Totally Cute. Very clever titling because of the toads, but it has dragonflies and these. And this was probably a panel. It is a panel that she just used border fabrics on to really liven it up and finish it off. And it is, I think it's for sale. I think that's what this means, but I'm not sure. This is called Gifts from the Sea. And as you can see, all of these beautiful fabrics have, shells or, swirls. And it's just beautiful colors, a simple pattern that she didn't want to cut these pieces up, so she found a way to use them, and they work nicely with these other squares. Nice quilt. This one is called 3D Under the Sea. It's a three-dimensional quilt with these fun sea characters that's been quilted nicely. Added a border down here that brings everything together. And I think if you use these glasses, she's telling you that it's a three-dimensional look. She said she had to try it just to see if it was, and sure enough, it is. So. We have many lap quilts this year. This one is called Cats in the Cradle. We had a member who was one of the original members of the Guild from 1991, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And she had so much fabric on hand and many books and patterns. And they had an estate sale where some of the women from our guild organized all the fabric and sold it. And this was a panel from that woman's stash, as we call it. And one of our members had bought that and cut it up and put sashing and surrounded the blocks with these fun colors and made this nice little quilt, which would be a cute wall hanging in a sewing room. This is called a scrappy star. This is a carpenter's star, which, you use large pieces of fabric to create a star. And she used, just things that she had on hand to use up some of her scraps. And this background fabric, oftentimes we use plain colors in the background, but I don't know if you noticed, many of the quilts today have prints in the background fabric, which it works beautifully with all of these scraps that she had. This is an interesting quilt. This woman has her first grandchild, a little girl named Emma Lou, and she made this quilt for her using the same pattern that this woman's mom had made for her children years ago. So the mother of this little girl had this quilt as a child, and she included a picture of that quilt. This is by one of our only male member, and he calls this Fish Pond. And if you look here, you can see the koi swimming around in the pond, surrounded by the rocks, surrounded by the land. Very nice use of fabrics to show off an idea that you have, and to show off this beautiful fabric too. This quilt is called Bahama Mama. It has this very nice Caribbean style fabric, and this woman used this pattern to show them off. She had all these squares that were donated by someone, unfortunately, who passed away. And after she got it done, she had some squares that were left over that she wouldn't use them anywhere else, but they needed to be in this quilt. So she cleverly put them on the back. I don't know if you can see them, but it made for a really fun quilt. And she used the rest of the squares as a border on the back of the quilt. Fun quilt. This one's called Owl Love. Again, probably either a panel or fabric that just had these images printed, but she made some 4 squares in here and offset them with plain colors and put them all together in this nice pattern that has the chains running through it, and created a really nice lap quilt. One of our members loves Halloween, and she saw this pattern and decided to make a Halloween quilt. And by using the black, it really sets off the pumpkins nicely. And some of the fabrics have spider webs, and we have the plaids and the leaves mixed in and dots. It's just a fun quilt that has the stars, the black stars. Fun pumpkin quilt. And the quilting design has the vines with the leaves that you might see on a pumpkin. This is a quilt I made from scraps. I had a whole bunch of blues and blacks and grays from different quilts I had made. So I saw a picture of this quilt and I thought, well, I think I can make that. And it wasn't hard to make these. It's just 16 pieces sewn together. But this was a little trickier, but I did it and then quilted it, and I love blue anyway, so I have this nice lap quilt for myself. This is called Illinois Cocoa Snowman. She purchased the fabric in Illinois, and it's got coffee cups, as you can see, and snowflakes, and so I think she probably likes hot chocolate. Pretty colors too. She brought out all the colors that are in the coffee cups, and nice quilting. This is a quilt I made. It's called Shooting Stars. This is called a disappearing hourglass, and if you look closely, you can see that there are hourglasses here and there throughout. It's a graduation gift coming up in June for a young girl who said her favorite colors were red and blue. And I didn't want the quilt to look patriotic, so I added turquoise and some bright yellows here and there to make it look more just like a pretty quilt instead of I love patriotic quilts, but I didn't want her graduation quilt to be a patriotic quilt. This is called selvage pinwheels. If you look closely, on the edge of fabric, they have what we call a selvage that has printing on it. It tells you whether it's cotton. It tells you what colors it might work with. And you can see all these stars, and it's telling you can use this kind of fabric with any of these colors. It oftentimes tells you the name of the fabric, the designer, and the company that prints the fabric. So she saved all her selvages. We cut them off before we used the fabric, but she saved them and was able to sew them together and make these strings to attach to this beautiful fabric to create pinwheels. Very clever quilt. This is a quilt one of my friends made. Her mom had terminal cancer, and when she would go to stay with her mom, she would work on these, we call them orange peels, and they're appliqued onto fabric, and then you stitch around them. And her mother wasn't a quilter, so she asked her lots of questions, and they talked about quilting quite a bit. And then when her mom died, she put it away and finally took it out this year and finished it. And there is in the center a beautiful hummingbird quilted onto this quilt. I think you can go to the other side of the quilt and see it better, but you can get an idea in the very center. I think it's better to go around and get it. It's right here. But this is what we call minky fabric, and it's very soft. And so the pattern that you use for quilting really shows up in it, and there's a beautiful hummingbird medallion on this quilt. This is a brown bag mystery quilt. So when you join one of these projects, you're going to get a bag filled with fabrics and a pattern. And so all these fabrics were given to her with the pattern, and she made this beautiful quilt. And it's for sale if anyone would like to buy it. There's a price tag on it. This quilt is called Arctic Animals, as you can see. They're all throughout this fabric, and she used a nice offset block to show them off. Beautiful choice of colors, and it does look cool and very Arctic-like. And I'm going to move around here so you can see the pattern of the quilting. Really nice quilting pattern. This pattern is called a drunkard's path because the circles, first of all, it's curved piecing, which is a little tricky until you get the knack of it. And these are quite small. But a drunkard's path, this is the block right here. And you can lay them out any way you want to. And some people lay them out so that they go like this in a design that makes it look like whoever was walking on the path was a little bit dizzy or tipsy. But this beautiful choice of fabric makes this a fun quilt. And she told me after she finished making this quilt, there's a special ruler that you have to cut these so that they fit together nicely. So she gave them away. She said she wasn't going to do that pattern again. This is called Flowers and Pebbles. And I don't think I need to explain that, but this is a batik fabric that has the hand painting on it and offset with this one that has the same color wave. That really makes it a very lovely quilt. She also does some hand quilting in here with large stitches, if you want to look closely. That gives it more dimension and interest. So she did a lot of hand quilting throughout her quilt. She did it all the way around the edges as well, which gives it a lot of character. Another beautiful Halloween quilt made by the same woman who loves the scalloped edges. This quilt is really pretty. It's called Spooky Glow. I think these are glow-in-the-dark fabrics, which are fun for a child or for a wall hanging. And this beautiful scalloped edge, and it's quilted in purple thread, which shows up really nicely on the borders of this quilt. She has little touches of yellow throughout too, which gives it a lot of life. These two quilts were made by the same woman. She absolutely loved this fabric and bought it, not knowing what she was going to do with it. But she made two quilts of the same design using the two different backgrounds, and she calls this one Meadow by Day, and this one is Meadow by Night. So she really found a way to emphasize the beautiful colors in her fabrics that she loved. This quilt is called How Does My Garden Grow? And this was, I don't know if it was a kit. No, but this is from a designer who designs quilt patterns as well as quilt fabrics. And this is one of her patterns called Seed Packets. And this woman made beautiful pinwheels and these flowers to have just a pretty quilt to either put on a bed or hang on the wall. How does my garden grow? And you can see the pretty flowers. And the fabrics, many of them have flowers in them as well, if you look closely. Okay, let's finish looking at the lap quilts, and then we're going to get to wall hangings. So this quilt was made by one of our quilters who was one of the designers that she follows, designed a whole book of patterns. And this is a sampler quilt using patterns from blocks from some of the different quilts in her quilt book. So, you know, there was one that had all houses, and there was one that had these trees and these different kinds of stars throughout. This quilt has much skill involved through applique and quilting. This woman does all her own quilting. She doesn't hire someone else to do it for her. And you can see her quilting designs throughout. They're just loops and amazing quilting. If you look closely, you can really see the different designs that she's put in to emphasize the quilt blocks. This is called Alice in Wonderland. She found this line of fabric, and she always loved that book and that movie. And so she made this beautiful quilt with all these brightly colored fabrics to honor Alice in Wonderland. I mean, we have the Queen of Hearts all throughout, and we have Alice, and we have the hats, and the tea party, the teacups. I mean, it's just filled with all kinds of fabrics about Alice in Wonderland. This pattern is called a friendship braid, and one of my friends loves these colors, and she had seen a quilt like this hanging in a quilt shop, and she said, ooh, I have to make that one. So this quilt has batiks, which are the hand-painted fabrics, along with some plain cotton fabrics, and it really came out nicely to show off the colors that she really loves. This is called stained glass, using these beautiful batik fabrics, emphasizing them with the black sashing in order to make these fabrics kind of come out of the quilt. Very nice piece. You can see it in its entirety. It really does look like stained glass. This is called Desert Oasis, and the colors used in this quilt represented things that you might see in the desert, and she had used these fabrics in another quilt that we already looked at. So this one is using up the scraps left over from some of her other quilts, and she did a really nice job of putting them together to make this quilt. And if you notice with some of these quilts that have a lot of scraps in them, if you use a border fabric that brings all those colors together, it kind of finishes it off and makes it look intentional. This is called Galaxy, and it has stars that look, and these look like curved seams, but they're not. It's just the way that you build this block right here that gives it the effect of looking like a curve. But those are all straight seams in this quilt. This is a beautiful quilt that would be a nice quilt for the Quilts of Valor program. And it has stars and loops in the quilting as well. This is a quilt. These blocks were already cut. I made this quilt. This was a woman who had died and had a lot of fabric, and one of our quilting friends brought them to a sewing day, and I saw these fish blocks and said, I'm going to take those. And I made this quilt for my niece's son, who's graduating from high school this year. He lives in Illinois, and he's on his school's competitive fishing team, and wants to be a fish and wildlife officer when he finishes his schooling. So I made this quilt for him. He has no idea it's coming, but I just loved the beauty of the fish and the black background, and put this quilt together to emphasize it. And the quilting, I paid someone to do the quilting for me, and if you look closely, you can see that there are fish throughout. It tracks right down through. Here's another fish here. So the quilting, I'll show you the back of it. I think you can see it better here. Maybe not. But anyway, it does have fish throughout, hiding in the rushes. This is called Bursting with Bunnies. All kinds of spring fabrics with spring animals. I see hens, and I see ducks, and I see nests, and I see rabbits and goats, and it's just a fun quilt with lots of color. And this is the quilt that we talked about that has the hummingbird on the back. And if you look closely, you can really see this hummingbird in the medallion on the back of this quilt. Really makes it a beautiful piece. Her mom loved hummingbirds, so she honored her mother by asking the person who quilted it to add that in. And this is our last section. These are our wall hangings. And there's no, these are just randomly made, and there's no limit to what people can do. This is a very interesting story. This woman's grandmother made these parts of this, it's called a double wedding ring. She made these years and years ago. So this woman had them, and she finally took them and put them together with this soft yellow fabric and created this design, and then paid someone to quilt it for her. And it's a nice way to honor quilters from the past. And if you look at these fabrics, you can tell that they're really old fabrics. And some of them probably were printed on feed sacks, which was during the Depression when people were unable to buy fabric. They would buy feed for their animals, and the company who sold the feed would print on the feed sack so that people had this cotton fabric with which to sew after they emptied the feed out and then washed the sack. So these are feed sack fabric. And the designs, like some of these might not be, but like if you look at these reds and these blues, like this one, those are probably feed sack fabrics. And just the era in which her grandmother made these probably leads us to believe that that's what those are. I'm not officially a person who would know that, but I know because of the era they probably are. And then we have the reproduction fabrics that I talked about, like on the red and blue quilt with the woman whose grandmother had embroidered the blue and white blocks. And those are purchased now. You can buy them in quilt shops that mimic these fabrics, but the colors, if you look at the depth of color here too, you can kind of tell. The colors were really vibrant and deep. So this is called yellow. And this woman took a class in curved seaming, which is, I've done it. It's a little tricky, but not bad. I think the more you do, the better you get at it. But she put blues and yellows together and made those 4 blocks. And if you look at them, there's some similarities, but they really are quite different. And then she did this beautiful quilting to show off her fabrics and her design. As you can see, this is from that class that we all took together where we made the New Hampshire Beauty. And this woman put borders on hers. I left mine smaller because I'm using it in my living room and I didn't want it too large. But by adding these beautiful batik fabrics, she brought all of the colors out to the border so that even though they look very different when you look at each part of the block, by putting this border in here, they really work beautifully together. This quilt is called People Are Like Stained Glass. She bought this fabric and didn't want to cut it up, so she found a way to just make a simple design with strips and stripes to show off the fabric and the colors in the fabric that she liked. And she put a quote here from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that says, "People are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when the darkness sets in, then the beauty is revealed only if there's light from within." So a nice way to show what she was thinking about with this beautiful fabric. If you can't tell, this person loves Halloween. So she used her embroidery feature on her machine to do this beautiful design on black, and then used this fun fabric and made a block in the block for the corners, cutting out these pumpkins from another piece of fabric. It's a really beautiful wall hanging to decorate your home for Halloween. This is called Clarabelle the Cow, and this is several techniques, the applique using all the different pieces of fabric, and then she put netting over it, and she did all this painting with thread. It's called thread painting, to give it movement and to stabilize it. And then she did the background quilting as well to give it flair. It's a beautiful piece. And she also, by using the colors that she did, it really makes Clarabelle stand out. This is a quilt that includes applique and using star points, using these blocks that are like hourglass blocks, and using the stars in the sashing. And then this is hand quilted. This woman likes to make pieces that she can use when she's watching a good movie and do the hand quilting. So if you can show this, she has flowers in here that she's all done by hand. This is made on a machine, all the applique blocks, but then she quilted it by using a needle and thread. So there's a lot of work in this quilt. It's a beautiful piece. This is called Harvest Moon, and this woman did a lot of embroidery on top, and she quoted the Neil Young song Harvest Moon from 1992, I'm sorry. And we just had a harvest moon, I believe, a couple of months ago, October maybe. This is called Winter Wolves, as you can see. This woman did a lot of thread painting on this to show the frost on the trees and the wolves, you know, in the forest. This is an amazing piece with a huge skill level. This woman's favorite flower is echinacea. They're cone flowers, and many of us have them in our gardens. And she used these beautiful colors on the blue background. These are all batiks, so they have depth in the fabrics, and she has this hanging in her home. So this is another New Hampshire beauty from a class that we took together, and she used the batik fabrics to give it depth. All of these are batiks, and put the nice border on it, and has that hanging in her home as well. This is done in wool, or flannel, I think. No, it's all wool. I'm going to take the card off so you can see everything on this. I've never worked with wool. I've worked with flannel, but working with wool is different, and she has done beautiful applique, small flowers, and then she has embroidery included to emphasize what she's done. That's a beautiful piece. And I think that just ties it up. So thank you for coming to see all the beautiful quilts that our members have made and to see what we do in the community at large. And if you'd like to become a member, we're pretty easy to find. We have a website, Franklin County QuiltersGuild.com. And we also encourage you, if you're a nonprofit, to apply to have a charity quilt made and donated to your group to earn money. So join us on Saturday and Sunday, April 6th and 7th, 2024, for our annual quilt show. Thank you.